Hello and welcome to VHTB, your guide to the talent, culture, and finance side of the space startup ecosystem. My name is Justus Kilian. I'm a partner at Space Capital, and I'm joined by Matt Gjertsen of Better Everyday Studios. Hey, Matt, how's it
I'm
going?
doing great. Hello.
And Brian Mejeur of AdAstra Talent Advisors. Hey, Brian.
Hey, good to be here.
All right, guys. So we have a really fun conversation today. I think an important conversation for the world we operate in. We've teased this in the past, and we're finally making time for it. It is now infamous conversation that Brian Chesky had, YC, September 2024, introducing the idea of founder mode. So it's become a little bit controversial since then, in terms of CEOs, playing a much more active role in companies and be seen as micromanaging. In some cases, it's seen as, the founders that have that founder market fit now are just, sort of actually controlling what needs to be done and taking the companies to their next growth curve. So I'm really excited to dig into this. Probably the first place to start is just to give a little bit of context around like what founder mode is. So Paul Graham and Brian Chesky have sort of both, worked on refining this idea post the conversation. And it really is this idea of rejecting that you should hire good people and leave them alone. And the alternative is that the founder has a much deeper and more intimate, so that's called manager mode. And it comes from the sort of business school textbooks, and what Brian sort of argues is that it's a result of companies that have been matured past the founder stage, where a new managerial sort of executive team has come in, and that is the right solution for them. But it is not the right solution for a founder who has grown a company to a very mature stage and still has a deep sort of technical and deep intimacy with the business. So that is what we're going to unpack. I'm curious if anybody has sort of first reactions from that conversation and from that sort of idea.
I've done a lot of reflection on this particular topic. Actually, I think I had an episode of my other podcast a few weeks ago kind of about it. And one of the things that I took away from it, or one of the ideas that I relate this to, is in almost every large organization I've been a part of, the major problems that made it difficult to do work day to day were either above everyone's pay grade or below everyone's pay grade. There was no one who was responsible for it, or the person who could change it didn't care. And like the example, one of the examples that I have is from, I may have told this on the show before, it was from Space Systems Command, where their big limitation was trying to onboard external contractors. And they did this big this big process map of figuring out why it was taking so long. And they came up with one person in one office who was slowing down kind of the security clearances. And the colonel in charge of this group went to that person and asked, why is this taking so long? And they said, well, I have to do it this way according to the Air Force instruction. It says I have to do this, so I'm just doing it this way. And so the colonel could not do anything about it. The individual couldn't do anything about it. Their boss, there were like 5 rungs of the chain that couldn't do anything about it. The waiver authority for that instruction was the Secretary of the Air Force. And so this colonel actually got on a plane and flew to DC and briefed the commander. It was like, hey, this is the problem. And the Secretary of the Air Force gave them a waiver. And that's kind of an example of situations that I think founder mode is really, really helpful in solving, in that the founder or the people higher up in the hierarchy have authority to just like wave their hand and solve problems that people at the lower levels could beat their heads against the wall for literally their entire career, and it never goes away. And I think that's why this idea of founder mode can be so helpful, is just the level of authority that you can bring to a problem that would otherwise persist forever.
Yeah, that's really good. I think it's almost like a little bit like founder mode could also be renamed to, or similar to, like owner mode. Like I think there's something about like the founder is like, usually the ultimate owner, and that is just tends to look different than an employee
Yeah.
too. And so having that level of ownership and blood, sweat, and tears into the business and like passion and dedication, like it produces a different result typically than employees. And there's nothing against employees. It just is different. There's a lot of pain and suffering and in founder mode as well. But like yeah, there's something not working, and the machine might not see it, but the
Yes.
owner of the machine might, and might be able to dive deep into it and solve it. And like, you know, the Elon book is a fascinating book by Walter Isaacson specifically, that like shows how often like Elon went into this like founder mode, and like he like calls them surges, right? Where he would like, there's this huge milestone, this huge problem, and like this insane amount of action with like what feels like a ton of micromanagement happens. And like, but most of those surges were like super effective.
Yeah.
And I think there's a time and a place for this that is hard to be solved by like the employee / bureaucratic like system.
I mean, I can reinforce that idea of the founder motivation and outcomes versus the employee. So, you know, when I'm talking to a founder and trying to get a sense of whether we're going to put capital in them, I directly ask, you know, why is this thing or this company so important to you that you're willing to give up the next decade or two of your life, not be at your kid's soccer game, not see, you know, your partner, not see your other family, you know, potentially, you know, forgo a house, potentially end up in bankruptcy to do this one thing? You know, why is it so important? You know, you would never ask an employee that, right? It's a very different level of expectations.
Yes.
You know, and that response, you know, really matters. And oftentimes, you know, we'll actually go and talk to, you know, the partner of the founder and see if they're aligned. Because if you have that tension there, they're not both like aligned on how big of a commitment that is, you know, that creates a lot of friction and can actually make it really hard for the founder to execute. So it's not just at the company, it's all these different levels of dimension. But I totally agree with you. I like that. Like, there's a fundamentally different knowledge and connection and purpose and outcome that you're trying to achieve as the founder, as the owner of a business.
Well, and that can come with a different lens on how to solve a problem, which is like where the functionality of this can come into play.
I think that switch to an owner, saying owner mode instead of founder mode, I also love, because it expands as something beyond what can happen just at the top. Because I actually really think that you can take this down to lower levels of responsibility and say, I, as the VP or the director or even the manager, I think ultimately what it is I'm willing to go past traditional bounds to use my authority to solve problems that my people can't solve themselves. You can't do it all the time, but that at least willingness to do it, I think, is at least what I see as a key component to founder mode. And so calling it owner mode says like you could exercise this at any level of the organization, which I think is helpful.
Well, it also implies that you're taking on the ownership of that action and that decision.
Yes.
And, you know, for a good manager that's going to sort of bend the rules or break through or sort of fight for their team, they sort of have to own the consequences of that if it doesn't go well as well, right? Yeah. So I really like that.
I was going to go to the other side of this. Everything we've been saying is positive, but, you know, when you first talked about this, Justus, I think 100% the thing that comes up is micromanagement. Like, that's the term that comes up. Yeah. How is this not micromanagement? How do you keep it from becoming micromanagement? I have a bunch of thoughts, but what are yours?
Well, I think at first pass, I mean, if we're talking, founder mode and one or two founders or something like that, you just, as a certain stage in the company, which happens pretty fast, you just can't do that. There are just not enough hours in the day. You will be extremely ineffective at everything if you try to do that. So I think it has to be selective, and if it's not selective, it'll be extremely ineffective, and it'll bleed into like extremely toxic cultures and terrible outcomes. So that's like, put simply, how I would think of that.
I think there's two ways that it's not micromanagement. So micromanagement, in my opinion, is when you are giving direction and sort of removing the choice from, the manager or the frontline engineer to act with authority to solve the problem. I think the best way to do it is, to be collaborative in the process, to be, a technical thought partner, a knowledgeable thought partner, the ability to help sort of see around corners. When Elon does it, I don't think he's involved in all aspects of the business. He looks at himself as sort of the chief engineer. At Tesla, he's like the chief designer. It's like the areas where he has a truly unique spike in knowledge and create a highly differentiated value that can shift the trajectory of a situation and a problem. That's where he gets involved, right? And he helps solve it. He works alongside the team and helps identify and gets into the weeds and pushes through it and removes all the barriers to preventing. So that's highly collaborative in my mind. It's, I think, very empowering because it's saying what you do matters, and I'm willing to roll up my sleeves and get my hands dirty. But, if you're not, that requires a technical intimacy and a fundamental intimacy of the whole business to say, this is the priority and I know where I'm strong and where I'm not strong. And so you can't do that if it's not an area where you're as capable or more capable than your team.
Yeah.
And so it requires a high level of self-awareness as well.
Yeah, and I think it can be heavy in micromanagement when you're directing exactly how every little piece is being done. But if you're mostly directing outcomes and timelines while also being in the trenches and being collaborative and supportive, that looks very, very different, those two scenarios. And so I think like what you're describing, Justus, is the much like healthier version of founder mode versus the micromanagement side.
And if you think about it, when you hear stories of people that come from these organizations, like done correctly, it can be incredibly empowering, because really what you're doing is you're getting in the trenches, you're solving the problems with them, but you're bringing your authority along with it. And so it's in these selective moments. So I think that's the first part, as you mentioned, Brian, is being selective to where you're getting involved of, is it critical to the company? Do you have that special expertise? But in those selective moments where you get in there, it's making it so that at the end of the discussion, it's not like, okay, we've solved this problem, we know what to do. Now we're going to work it through the 5 layers of bureaucracy to get final approval. It's just like, now we have approval. And I think those engineers and those frontline people are probably getting a lot of that feeling of being really empowered to do their best work, because in those critical moments, the founder is there to just say, go, let's do this.
Yeah, and to the point too about being selective, like you can't have your whole company in founder mode, like in this like surge mode all the time. It won't work, and it'll come out in like really ugly ways. And so it's got to be selective and selective departments at times that people can recover. And you also need to be in charge of the culture as this is happening. Like where I've seen this not go well is when most of the company was doing this for a very long time, like doing this really intensive surge, and the founders were not keeping a good pulse on how to keep morale up during this, and were like letting their management style get in the way of effective results. And I think like there's ways where this absolutely can come out sideways and turn into like just extended, like you need to work like I work for a really long time, and that's our only way through. Like that doesn't like lead to good outcomes.
I mean, we've highlighted, Elon's style is sort of in the positive, but I've also heard from, many current and former employees that, sometimes when he has a little bit too much focus on SpaceX, he could spend a little bit too much time and sort of meddle in things, and it can actually be quite distracting. And so it can actually equally be as valuable when another company has a priority and, there's a little bit of time for them to just stay focused on things. So, there can be like with so much authority, it can, unless it's clear, unless it's prioritized, it can create whiplash. And even the best leaders don't do this effectively all the time.
Yes.
I think that's the reason I'm bringing it up.
To bring up another leader similarly that I've heard of, Jensen Huang of Nvidia. Yeah. I've heard that his all his direct reports actually, and the whole, like many employees, hate it when he goes on vacation, because he gets more into email when he's on vacation, because he doesn't have any meetings, he doesn't have anything. And so he just goes to the beach, his kids are out playing on the beach, and he's there on the laptop firing off emails all, 18 hours a day. And so it's because he doesn't have, to your point, like kind of the distraction of day-to-day work, he's able to just be involved in everybody's business, and it can kind of be overwhelming. At least this is a story that I've heard.
He's famously an extreme example. Like, I don't think he has any executive team. It's just him, and he has like 50
or 60 direct reports. Yeah.
Yeah. So that's probably, a little bit pushing it to the edge.
Yeah.
But, I do think this is particularly relevant for space tech because there are a number of great leaders in this area that have demonstrated the importance of that technological prowess and the understanding and the value to get in and blow through the big challenging roadblocks and milestones. Pete Beck at Rocket Lab, Elon certainly at SpaceX. There are, also the warning signs at Boeing after the merger with McDonnell Douglas, and how it went from an engineering culture to a manager culture, and how that has literally ruined one of the best companies and best brands, of the last 100 years. So, the consequences are huge. It's not like software, the stakes are very high in this area. And so, I think the value of founder mode is high. So, did anybody else have any last points? Otherwise, I'll just recap, because I think we had some really great sort of key takeaways here.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right. So great. I think, we identified that founder mode is really helpful to solve problems, and it can be applied at lower levels. Managers can sort of take on that authority, and maybe a better reframing of it is actually owner mode. Ultimately that means that you're going beyond sort of, the traditional means to push beyond and get the results and fight for your team or fight for the company, and remove barriers in a way that a founder would. A deep commitment to seeing things all the way to their end. And what this ultimately means, and where it's done effectively, if done ineffectively, it can feel like micromanaging, but if done effectively, you're focusing on a selective level of involvement. At the end of the engagement, it really is an empowering situation where you're not then having, you haven't aligned around a decision and then have to go through the layers of bureaucracy and sort of get manager buy-in to, actually implement this. You have the plan, you have the authority, the CEO is behind you, and you can go execute with speed. And so that is a really empowering thing to, feel like you can solve these really big, tough, important problems. The risk is, it ends up, not being a big, important problem. It ends up bleeding into, people's day-to-day work, and can be disempowering. And so even the best leaders have to balance this. It can be done really effectively. It can be done not. But this is really important in the space domain, where the risks are much higher. So I think this was a productive conversation. I appreciate all your guys' thoughts on this one. This isn't going to be the last time it comes up, but I think this was a healthy start.
Thanks, Justus.
Thank you.